Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to radio.com on a busy Monday. As we begin Super Bowl week, and really, I can't remember in all these years of doing Super Bowls, which I've been doing, for over 40 years. I cannot remember a year where the Super Bowl in the 2 weeks leading up to it, which usually is highly tedious, where the Super Bowl has taken a back page to other stories day after day after day, especially here in New York, but now nationally, obviously, with a story that is going to command not only the back pages but command the front page for a couple of days. Um, an athlete dying young is always an incredible tragedy. Um, this is an athlete who did get to play a full career and got to live half a life, but obviously was just beginning the second half of what looked like it would be an extremely productive life in every way. He was a very established businessman. He had his hands in a lot of different things. He was obviously very devoted to his daughters and to his family, um, and had, as you've heard, and listen, at this point, almost 2 days in, um, there's not much really to add here. You try to further a couple of things here and talk about a couple of different sides of this. Um, Again, I'm not going to sit here and investigate what happened because that'll take weeks and months. Nor do I know very much about helicopters anyway. Um, uh, I know there's been some finger pointing about whether that helicopter should have been in the air, and I do know that the ramifications of this are going to be felt for many, many years to come because the people killed with Kobe, their families are going to be filing enormous lawsuits against Kobe Bryant's estate. I mean, that's the next chapter to this whole thing. Unfortunately, that's going to happen for years to come. I mean, that just is automatic these days in this litigious society we live in. That's just automatic. But he was a constant helicopter user, which I didn't know until yesterday. I mean, I had no idea. And I know plenty of people who fly them back and forth to the city to the Hamptons here all the time. I mean, I've never been a helicopter user, but I know people who use them all the time as a way to get back and forth with the traffic to the Hamptons from the city. I mean, there's a very thriving business, as a matter of fact. I know executives who take them all the time back and forth to the city from the Hamptons and from different parts of Long Island. So they're always in constant use. Again, it comes down to perspective. It comes down to pilot safety. It comes down to the conditions being safe and the machine being safe. I mean, that's all the things that will be investigated in the weeks and months to come. Uh, you have Kobe was interesting in the fact that he had a little bit along the lines, a little bit along the lines of A-Rod, I would say, in that he has reclamated his persona as he's retired. I think A-Rod, you've seen do that. Kobe did it on a even much bigger plane. When he was a young player, Kobe was considered to be downright arrogant. I mean, was not very friendly. Was insanely competitive. Always had an incredible work ethic, as everyone knows. I mean, that's been mentioned, and anyone who played basketball or worked with him in basketball knew his work ethic. But you know what? That's true of all the great players. I mean, that I'm telling you, that is true of having had a chance to be around all these different sports through the years. That is true of all the great players. They are the hardest workers. I've told you how many times that before an NBA final, that very familiar sound would be coming down the hall, and it would be Larry Bird, the Boston Garden, going out to shoot. 2 and 3 hours before I'd see another player, he would be there, going through his ritual that would last sometimes an hour. on any given night, and just going through his shooting. Racks of balls, guy there to rebound for him, going through his shooting, and just this is 5:30 on a night where the game's not going to tip till 9 o'clock. I mean, I saw that. If I saw it once, I saw it 20 or 30 times in my life. Him doing that through the years. Um, so that you hear that about how hard he worked, and he clearly did. I mean, but that's true. Like I said, that's true. All the great ones, they do. They work hard. They work very. Tom Brady, you hear it about all the time. But all of them, they keep themselves in great shape. You hear about LeBron James. I mean, what the incredible uh, lengths he goes to keep his body in shape. Same thing for Tom Brady. I mean, the amount of work they put in is extraordinary. That's why you can get triple doubles on back-to-back nights at 35 years old. I mean, it's just but same thing with Kobe, who played a very long time. Came in as a teenager and kind of orchestrated in a little more, not even more subtle. It's funny. If you remember the Nets in those days, if I remember that draft, I think the Nets were picking seventh. And they picked Kerry Kittles. I think it was seventh, might have been sixth. But John Calipari was going to pick Kobe, but they scared him out of it because he basically told him we're going to play for him. They power played him right there. I mean, and got away with it. I mean, those things went on even then, and obviously, got himself to a place that made plenty of sense, and where he went on to incredible, success, both in terms of team success and personal success. And he was the guy who, you had Jordan, and then you had Kobe, then you had LeBron, although they're not in a direct line, because Kobe is very much more like Michael than LeBron is. Kobe and Michael are very much alike. Michael's better, but they're very much alike. Kobe was much more like Michael than, say, LeBron was. LeBron's just a different player. He's a much more like Oscar Robertson or Magic Johnson, in their full court abilities and all around abilities. I mean, he can still score on a prolific level, but so could Oscar, as an example. So, I mean, he was clearly. I mean, I'm not going to get into rankings because this isn't the time or the place. I mean, I always say this. We were talking about this with my boys, who always want to talk about who's the best, who's this, who's that. And as I said, listen, no matter what sport it is, if you sit down and you can put the guy in any sport, NFL, baseball, football, basketball, if you can put the guy in the top 20 players of all time, if that guy fits very snugly in the top 20 players of all time, then you're dealing with an immortal player, no matter who it is. So if he doesn't get cut out of the top, because trying to squeeze guys into five guys, I mean, it's just so. I mean, I tweeted this the other day because the modern players were listing top fives, and they didn't have Wilt on the list. I mean, come on. They didn't have Bill Russell. Hey, the old guy who, he gives you a trophy when the season's over? That's Bill Russell. All he did was win 11 championships in 13 years. Okay? He's not on the list. I mean, come on. I mean, that's what happens now. It's like the list started 20 years ago. Well, it didn't. So when you try to span generations, you get into these silly arguments, so it's not worth getting into. It really isn't. But he clearly was one of the all-time greats. And, in the NBA, if you're one of those guys who has just a first name, where that's all, there is no need to explain whether it's Wilt or Oscar, LeBron, Michael, etc., Kobe. I mean, that's Magic. I mean, that's all it takes is if you have reached that status, then you have reached this iconic status, which obviously, and he did have a impact on a lot of guys who are still playing in the league. Had relationships with different guys because he still worked very hard at basketball and had his his basketball, his Mamba factory, his basketball factory where he worked, and where I gather they maybe even have been headed from what is some reports. Again, I'm not getting into reports because I don't know what's accurate, what's not. You just don't know. I know there's the police were very angry at TMZ. You know what? It's a fine line there. If you're going to ask TMZ, TMZ's in the business of breaking stories. If you're going to ask them to wait till next of kin are notified, it's a very fine line because if you ask them to wait and while they're waiting, somebody from the police department leaks it to another news source and they beat the TMZ the story, and don't think that doesn't happen because it does. So it's a very fine line. And I understand it's not the most important thing to be first, but that's the business they're in. And if they can do it, and I've said this many times, give those group, and I know a couple of those people, so, when you've heard them on my show in the past, but be fair, when they break a story, they are right. They don't jump the gun. Don't ask me how they get them. Don't ask me if their means are, the cleanest. I mean, there's nothing illegal for anything they do, but I mean, they might pay people off, but they're more within their rights to do that. They don't answer to anybody. They're a news gathering organization with a lot of sources and a lot of tentacles into hospitals and into police departments and into all different areas. But a couple of times, I mean, they had the Michaels. I remember being on the air, and we were debating whether, and I'm telling you, it must have been 20 minutes before I mentioned it on the air, maybe longer. And we were trying to get a second source before they said Michael Jackson was dead, but TMZ had reported it a half hour before that. And they had no qualms. So I've gotten to the point with them when they say something, I believe them. Because they seem to be, they don't go unless they know it. And when they know it, they feel very comfortable that they're right. And nobody has found them. No one's accusing them of being wrong here, obviously. What they're accusing them of now and what the police have a problem with is they evidently, that's how some next of kin were notified, was from TMZ, which the police are very unhappy about. So it's a very tricky fine line there that I don't know what the answer is to. Again, that's not the central theme of this. And, they've been so slow to release the other names of the, non-Bryant participants. For a long time, all they were releasing was the pilot and Kobe and his daughter. And boy, how sad is that? I mean, imagine being another sibling in that family, or Kobe's wife, and having to deal not only with the idea that your husband's not coming home, but that the father of your daughter isn't coming home, but now your daughter's not coming home either, which just takes the story and ratchets it up to a couple of, a couple of levels more intense in terms of just how horrific it is. Bad enough that Kobe lost half a life. His daughter lost almost a full one. I mean, she was a baby. Terrible. Just terrible. 9 people perish. And it's funny, no matter what the year is, there's something to the way it just stops people in their tracks when it's an air fatality. And you can think back to the years that you've, seen them, Newt Rockney died in a plane crash. Obviously, you've seen the movies about La Bamba, and you've seen the movies about Buddy Holly and how they perished in Iowa, renting a plane because it was no heat in the bus. So they rented a plane and the plane crashed in Clear Lake, Iowa on one of those rock and roll tours. JFK, which I remember that morning when that happened. I mean, that just controlled the entire news. I mean, just like this, Kobe one did this. I mean, that was even big because they actually even stopped programming. Well, that was JFK Jr., but I mean that one they actually was like wall to wall. That was crazy. The only thing I'd compare to that would be with a Lady Di, uh, accident. It was of the same magnitude. But you think of all the different people. I was looking at a list and of athletes and famous people who have perished in air fatalities, and remember Halliday just recently with what he was doing, and I've mentioned Payne Stewart many times of me sitting at the Super Bowl in between Payne Stewart and Robert Fraley, who was Bill Parcells' agent and Payne Stewart's agent. And I knew Robert well. I didn't know Payne, and um, they came down to root for the Pats when Bill was the head coach, and I sat in between the two of them at the Super Bowl, and then, a short time after, they're dead, dying in a plane accident. Thurman, of course, which just rocked the city. Like, yeah, if you remember that, I learned that by the Mets playing a. The Mets were playing a doubleheader, twilight doubleheader, and they put it on the scoreboard of the Met game. That what had happened. That's how I found out about Thurman and that whole weekend that we lived through. And I saw a couple people saying, the NBA should have canceled the games. How is the NBA going to cancel? I mean, I didn't buy that for 1 second. I just don't understand the mentality of it. How's the NBA going to cancel their games for somebody who isn't even in the league now? I mean, if Michael Jordan unfortunately passed away, they're not going to cancel the games. I mean, if this was a current player, I could see maybe the thought process. And then I'm not even sure a sport would for a current player. I mean, there aren't many things where you're going to cancel the sport. That doesn't. I mean, that's what you do when it's a national leader, when it's a president, or a tragedy that affects everybody. But I didn't see that as making much sense myself. I mean, I'm sure there were players of different degrees, players who knew him. Obviously, players who grew up watching him. But again, I mean, I didn't see that as being something that would happen. I would have been surprised if that were the case. Roberto Clemente, I remember. Remember that week. That year he had gotten his 3,000th hit off John Matlack that year, if you remember. On a Saturday afternoon, he got a double up the gap off John Matlack to get his 3,000th hit. I always liked Clemente. I was a big Clemente fan. I used to go to Shea Stadium to see Clemente play. I loved to watch him play right field. And he was, as you know, delivering the earthquake victims and all the victims of all the natural disasters. They was delivering them all the goods on that plane, and the plane went down. Oh, and I believe New Year's Eve. It might have been the day before, but it was right around there. It was right on the New Year's Eve holiday that year. The Marshall football team. You've seen that movie. What went on with Marshall? Marciano was a little before my time, but as was obviously Rockney. But I mean, you know the stories. And so many of them, if you know, have been movies. I mean, you've seen the Patsy Cline movie. Crazy. I'm sure you've seen that movie. Really good movie, as a matter of fact, about Patsy Cline and how big she was when the plane, they drove right into the side of the mountain. John Denver. Jim Croce, if you remember Jim Croce. I mean, so you can go on and on and on. There's a vast list through the years. But it just seems to, because there's always a story as to why. Why? Because we want to hear the story too. because every one of these times these things happen, it impacts our feeling of mortality. And wait, why did that happen? Why was that unsafe? Was it bad judgment? Did the pilot screw up? Should he have been in the air? Did Kobe, tell the guy, "Hey, let's go. I got to get there." And did he tell the guy to fly? I mean, who know? I mean, it's his helicopter. That's why I bring that up. You just never know. I mean, that's happened before too. So you don't know what the reason is, what the storyline is, what happened. Not that it's going to change anything, but you still want to hear it because you want to know how you're safe and how you can travel safely. Because that's what comes into this. It's like when someone dies of a heart attack, people rush to their doctor and get themselves tested. It happens all the time. When you have a famous person die of a heart attack, the doctor visits go up like 10,000%. Because it impacts your feeling of comfort as well as you feeling a sense of loss, which I'm sure many basketball fans do today. Although he was no longer in your life on a daily basis. I mean, Kobe was not in our lives on a daily basis. Maybe he was in yours, he wasn't in mine. I don't know whose he was in. But he had left the stage. He looked like he was involved in a lot of things. He was doing well business-wise. He'd always done well business-wise. Smart kid, made a lot of money with sneakers, made a lot of money with investments, invested in one of those drinks. I remember one of the ones that wanted to be Gatorade. I don't remember the name of it. Yeah, Powerade or whatever the heck it was. He put in some money and made a fortune. So he's done very well business-wise. Obviously had a beautiful family. And, this is a guy who had reclamate the whole thing in Colorado, some of the issues with him and Shaq with those Laker teams. I mean, there was some stuff there that he had to reclamate, which he did a very good job of that. And clearly he became a much more graceful, more open person in later years than he had been early on. Early on, he was a driven force. That was him. He was always on his game, always had his fastball, always looking to compete, always liked the competition, always, that guy, that driven individual. That was him. I mean, there are players who, by their sheer force of personality and by their sheer drive for excellence, just impact everything. And he's one of those guys. There are guys like that. Brady's like that. Just by the sheer force of his personality, by the drive for excellence that he has, he lifts everything with that drive that he has. Won't accept mediocrity. Nor would Kobe, who was a fierce competitor. And, he came in as a baby, lasted an incredible number of years, played a very, very long, rich career, accomplished a great amount, prolific scorer, won 5 championships. So I had a great career. There's no question. And leaves a tremendous void. So you have these athletes now who cut across. We've had that line in the last. It really started. I've mentioned this many times. This really started with Ali, Namath, late '60s, where the athlete crossed over from being just an athlete, just a jock, to where he crossed over into cultural icon. He erased that line. Ali did that, clearly did it. I mean, better than anybody. But Jordan did that. You've seen Tiger Woods do that. You even go to somebody as popular as a modern athlete, and meaning modern in the idea of post World War II. There was no more popular athlete anywhere than Mickey Mantle. I mean, he was incredibly popular. Still to this day, is without question, one of the two or three most popular baseball players of all time. Not even close. But he was still a baseball player. He did not cut across the way these guys do now, culturally. And that whole line has been eradicated, and it was by Namath. And I heard somebody trying to explain, looking at Namath's career and trying to explain how he went to why he's a Hall of Famer. First of all, I don't think people realize how good Namath was, how talented he was. He broke down. He wasn't on great teams. He broke down. But when he was right, he was as good as anybody ever was playing that position. He just wasn't right very often. His career almost had a Bill Walton-like tendency to it in the pros. It was like a fleeting moment where everything was right. But he had incredible physical gifts. Remember, Bear Bryant told me the best athlete he ever coached. He said it was close between Joe Namath and Ozzie Newsome. This guy coached gazillions of athletes. Namath, Ozzie Newsome. But the aspect of what he did and the cultural icon he became, the trendsetter he became, he ushered in an entirely new era for the NFL of how it was covered, how it was followed. Just in so many ways, invaluable what he meant to that league. And you've seen guys do that, and now these guys have cut across a little bit. Like you saw it last night on the music, how many of the young, and the NBA is locked into a lot of the music of the day. You saw how many of them were impacting Kobe, and how Kobe impacted so many of the music people that when I got home last night and that was on, kids were watching the grounds, you could see they were, the Kobe jerseys and mentioning Kobe and Kobe's house and this and that and blah, blah, blah. So you saw how much he was present at that event. So Tiger Woods has clearly done that. Michael, without any question. Everybody wanted to be Michael. Michael was it. He was perfection. He had the smile, he had the looks, he had the charm, he had the suits, and he won, and he made this last shot, and he was unstoppable, and that was him. So you've seen that, and I don't think Kobe was, I don't think he was ever Michael. I don't think anyone's ever Michael as far as you add all those things up. But he was big. And in later years, his persona grew in that way as he kind of expanded his horizons a little bit. And you can tell how many people quietly revered his drive and his excellence and the stuff like that. And what I like about a guy like Kobe is that he didn't care if he was popular. He was going to do what he wanted to do, where he wanted to do it, and he was going to win. He wasn't make any apologies. He wasn't politically playing the game. He was just doing what he believed in. And if you didn't like it, that was tough on you. He wasn't going to worry about that. But then years later, he became a little more likable and a little more open to people. And that's the guy who gets left behind here when I think it was Barack Obama who said it. I'm pretty sure that he thought Kobe was destined to do some really great things in the next 40 years. He was a highly successful businessman. He had a lot of ideas. He had a lot of things that he was thinking about. I don't know what venue they were going to be expressed in. I don't know what avenue he was going to take, but clearly that was going to be part of it. It would have been interesting to watch, and now we won't get a chance to see that. So it's a story that won't go away for a while. Obviously, there's a lot of parts of it about people want answers. as to why they crash, why they do this, why they do that. And, they don't want to hear, oh, it's just the act of God. I don't want to hear that. They want to know why, because it makes them sleep a little better if they know why. All right, we'll get to some other things too. Got a couple of other things to get to, and maybe even touch on a little football if we can today. We'll start to do that tomorrow as we get. I could tell you one thing that I noticed, and you don't know until this week, and it takes a turn. Last week, and I happened to speak to someone today who was telling me about it. Last week, the all week, as I watched, the tickets got less expensive and less expensive, less expensive, on game tickets. And then there's always that day where either they go plummeting or they take off, and they took off dramatically, which makes me think Kansas City is in buying up everything because the ticket price has gone through the roof. It has become an incredibly hot ticket at the Super Bowl, which tells me that Kansas City is going to be in mass looking for Super Bowl tickets, and they intend on seeing if they can, have their big moment. They waited 50 years for this, and they've been rabid fans. We know that. And it sounds like they are going to make a major trek to Miami if they can, because it's become a very, very hot ticket as we get ready to hit Miami, or a lot of you do get ready to hit Miami in the next couple of days. Although, obviously, it hasn't been a tough time to keep the tedious part of the Super Bowl talk, which usually begins too early because there's nothing else going on, has not been the case. I mean, we've gone days and days now without talking about it, but we've had all the baseball sign stealing stuff, all the Beltron stuff, then the next manager for the Mets, and then obviously everything else that's gone on, Eli retiring, and so on and so forth, and then this incredible tragedy that has just completely overrun everything and will for another day or two. So, I mean, it's been a very different run up to the Super Bowl. What should be a very, very interesting one at that. Back in, the Mets had been interested in Marte, but he's been traded by the Pirates to the Arizona Diamondbacks for a couple of prospects. So Marte, who has spent 8 years with the Pirates and who was a lifetime 287 hitter, last year had career highs with 23 homers, 82 RBIs. He's also won a couple of Gold Gloves. So Pittsburgh got right-handed pitcher Brennan Malone, 33rd pick in the 2019 draft, and shortstop Leovir Piguero, a 19-year-old from the Dominican Republic, who's another top prospect. So Marte, who, as we said, had been mentioned by the Mets and had been something of a target for the Mets, does not wind up with the Mets. He winds up with the Diamondbacks in a trade, so the Pirates make the trade there. The Browns have plucked Andrew Berry out of the Eagles organization to run the Browns. So he takes over now. The Browns will try it anew again and see if they can finally get it right. It's been a long time coming for them to try and get it right. I mean, they clearly have gone out and gotten some players. They did that. They have players. I don't think there's any question. They need some discipline. They need some coaching. And hopefully they've moved in the right direction there, as a matter of fact. So we got that going on right now. We're not that far away when you think about it. It's already, when we get through this week, it'll be February. And baseball starts really early. First of all, the regular season starts early again, which I'm against. The weather in New York is awful at that time of year. It just is. I mean, the games aren't even fun if you're there because it's so cold. All weather's just not good before May. It just isn't anymore. So I'm against that season starting in March, but it is. And you have games. I mean, they're playing preseason games like the 22nd. It used to be they were playing like the 4th or 5th of March. Now they're playing the 22nd of February. They're playing games. So that's a couple of weeks away. It'll be less than 3 weeks away to not only the pitches and catches, it'll be 2 weeks to pitches and catches, it'll be 3 weeks to games. So it'll be right around the corner, and it's going to be a fascinating, especially the Mets, because the Mets have the Yankees have to just stay healthy and get some productivity out of Stanton. That's what it comes down to. The Yanks are so over, they're so loaded. When you're going to look at the fight for their fifth starter spot and look at how overwhelming that is, you know how their riches are just, from a baseball standpoint, are insane. And they obviously need to make some decisions about certain players. They have a logjam at a couple of players. As we know, the Yankees have a bunch of right-handed DHs. That's what they have. They have way too many righty power hitting DHs. They have a whole team of them, and you can't play them. You can't play them all. So you wind up putting one at catcher. You wind up having to put one at first base. You wind up obviously putting one at DH spot, but you have to worry about putting them in other places too. So that's just the way it is. I mean, and there's going to be fierce competition there. I mean, look at Andujar if he's there. If he's there, and I think he will be, he's got to. Now his bat is good enough that it's live enough that he can fight his way in, whether it's wherever he shows any level of competency. He might just be a DH. It's possible, or he could be a guy who could maybe play in the outfield. Maybe. I think it's more likely he could play first base and just be a non-throwing first baseman for the most part. He doesn't have to be good at any of these positions. What he can't be is a detriment. You know what a detriment looks like? A detriment looks like when the Mets put Hundley in the outfield. Okay, that's a detriment. You put a guy out there who can't catch the ball. You put a guy at first base who's not going to even, slow down an errant throw. No less scoop it. He's not going to even slow it down. He's going to take one swoop at it to see if he can, get it to land in his glove, which a lot of times it can. If the first baseman knows what he's doing, a lot of times that big swoop can wind up in the glove. But that's not the way you want to play. And that's the position they're going to be put in, fairly quickly, as a matter of fact. As far as the Mets, they still have, they're going to be fascinating because tell me right now what Cano is. Is he a guy who's going to play 125 games at second base? Is he a guy who's going to be a once-a-week player? Is he a guy who's going to become a battle for your bench, or is he going to be the guy? I think he still thinks of himself as being the guy, but let's see what happens. And Cespedes, what is he going to give you? He's going to talk the talk early. Now, not his team. There's no way. That's gone. He's got to be smart enough to know that that's gone. This team belongs to Alonso, or it does already. When you can, first of all, with his personality, but when you can just step in and do what he did, that's just the way it is. And he will seize that too. I don't think there's any question. He's ready to seize that. So that won't bother Cespedes though, because Cespedes just knows, hey, if I do my job and I do what I know I can do, then I get my money, which is what this is about. It always is with him. But there's certain players like that. You got to ride that. You got to ride the guys who are like that. If they're like that, you just leave it alone and realize that they are. Just that's the way it is. That's what that is what motivates them. And you just leave it alone and realize it's just going to be what they're going to use to motivate themselves. But they will motivate themselves. And then you have the whole situation with the bullpen, which has got to really decide things because they're gonna leave a lot of games. With their starting pitching, they are going to leave a lot of games that they're going to have the lead in the 6th and 7th, and that's where this thing will be won or lost, is what the Mets do in the 7th and 8th innings. Those 6 outs on a nightly basis could be really an adventure. That could wind up being a real adventure. If it doesn't, that'd be great, but it could be. I just don't have any faith in bringing back and reclamating a guy who just didn't look like he fit here. I think it's too much to ask. I really do. Off the year he had last year, I just think it's way, way too much to ask. I would go in a different direction. And they have a guy there who can do it. If you can be very, very gentle with Betances in a lot of ways. You got to watch how you bring him into games. You don't want to bring him in a lot of dirty innings. Also, keeping him healthy, making sure he gets what he needs in terms of rest and everything else, and then making sure he understands what he can control and what he can't control, because that's a big key for him. But he can be an incredibly useful reliever. That could turn out to be a big, really big pickup for them. As far as the Super Bowl, which I bet you this weekend with everything that went on, you probably didn't even spend 10 minutes on it on the bye week, and it was a great matchup, which I think is positive from the game standpoint, that you could get away from it for 24 hours, whatever it is, and just and just being able to do that and not just be inundated with it where it's 13 days and by now you go in there saying, oh, I'm sick of talking about this already. Well, now you haven't done it yet. Now you got to the second week and you haven't even talked about it. Now you're in great shape. Now they're going to start, and I'm sure they did today, or today's a little rough. There was still a lot of stuff that had to happen. A lot of people had to give their opinion. Everyone has to give their opinion in this world of now everyone having one. I'm stunned by the number. Growing up in the business that I did and understanding how you just couldn't create your own program. Now think about it. You can create your own programming now. So you don't need to get a break. You don't need to have somebody teach you. You don't need to do anything. You need to just carve out. This is like the gold rush, back in the day. You could carve out your strike. I saw a number the other day, and it was given to me by someone in the industry. They're predicting almost 2 million podcasts in this country in the next 18 months. 2 million. Think about that. That's if you spent your life in broadcasting, that is insanity. That's almost like, you know what? At the age of 7, they give you a podcast. Or at the age of 10, they give you a podcast. I mean, that's what it's come to. Almost 2 million podcasts. So to say cutting through in a world of somewhat clutter, I mean, think about how many more podcasts there were than full-time radio shows. Think about it, like in this town. Think about how hard it is to get a full-time radio gig on the air in this town. If you're someone who's tried to do that or have been in this business and realize how hard that is, where people have the jobs and don't give them up, or it's only a couple of, there's so many applicants year in and year out for the same couple of positions, how hard that is. But think about the idea of, instead of that, and decreasing that, you now have 2 million podcasts in a year on everything you can think of. And I've had people, I told you, now someone like me, especially since they think I might have more time now, and they know that part of it is if they can get me on and ask me some questions, they can get attention from my answers. So it kind of puts them on the map. So I have everybody and their relatives sending me stuff and asking me to come on their podcast every day. Hey, could you just give me 20 minutes? I'm on. And everyone wants to do it whenever. But it's like that now everywhere I go. I mean, I get deluged with these things every day. And it's amazing to me how. So I was saying, I was in a meeting last week about what else programming, what we do now at radio.com, with the guys who were some of the first podcast people, and talking about how they're going to package my stuff versus not package it versus do this different. We're just discussing a whole bunch of different things. But we were discussing how now you can just hang out a shingle and go. I mean, that's basically it. And, I'm in the business. Hey. And there's not like Well, your podcast is heard here, and your podcast, hey, you're selling them to the same, clearing area as everybody. Everybody's podcast is going to the same place because all they're doing is taking a piece, and then if you get, they're willing to, you know, let you do well if you can get people to hit it. But that's the hard part, is it's out there, but who's going to download it? That's what you need. You need people to show up at it, and that's the tricky part, and that's where the idea of, oh, I got to get guests. See, if you're a brand, I was telling a group this about 2 weeks ago. I said they were asking me about whether it was tougher to be in the business now or years ago, and I said it's much easier to break into this business now because there's so many different ways to get in the door and so many different shows available. Just look at the podcast as an example. Anyone can have a podcast. But getting that noticed, getting people going to start to click on to whatever you say and because they know you, because you're a brand. So if you're not a brand, if you are a brand, you have a huge leg up. If you're not a brand, it is very hard now. It's easy to get in the business. It's very hard to get noticed. So few are going to just stand out when you have just an outrageous number. I mean, it's just, the number is just unbelievable. I mean, it really has changed, and it's remarkable what it's done to this. It's crazy. It really is. And in some ways, it's good, and in other ways, it's just an incredible amount of clutter. Of which, hey, there's going to be some good ones. There's going to be some new ones that are good ones. There's going to be some different ones. I mean, so it's not like it can't be done, but it's got to be highly original, and it's also got to catch on at the right time, because eventually, I got to figure these companies that deal with this stuff and who log it and promote it and everything else. There can't be a bottomless pit to this thing. There has to eventually be an end game to where that stuff ends and it's no longer part of what you do. I mean, it can't just be wide open forever. That has to happen. I don't know what the saturation point is for this. I would have passed it at way fewer than 2 million podcasts, but and it's just an insane number. And they're out there, and I think half of them have asked me to be on the shows. I've heard from people who say, oh, I visited the studio once. Okay. Now, as Mons will tell you, or anyone who's been around the show has told you, we'd have people visit all the time who, they put that up at charity events. One of the things we'd send people is the right to have people view the show. So we've had people in and out of there for years. I mean, at the end, I had to log in people almost every day because we had charities that hadn't paid off on their thing yet. So, get a note, hey, I was in doing that. What are you doing now? I got a podcast. Oh, yeah, all right, yeah. So, would you come on? Well, so, I mean, that's where the whole thing is now. It's crazy. It really is. It's. I cannot believe the way it's changed. It really has just radically changed in these last couple of, I want to say months, but years, last 2 years especially, in a very, very big way. So, I mean, from that standpoint, it's going to be a very interesting spring for the Mets. And one way you're just hoping the Yankees maintain. They have no questions that need answering except for health issues. They are overpoweringly strong. The question is, can they ride some good fortune this year and stay healthy? We haven't spoken that much about the game, obviously, and not much has changed. Once you get past the tedium of the Pro Bowl, and I kept my record alive, I never watched one play of the Pro Bowl. I never have. I try not to even see a highlight, as a matter of fact. I turned on the car radio when I got in the car last night, and the game was on the radio. So I actually heard them say the score. It was in the 30s because they had done the game on the fan. So I actually heard them mentioning the Pro Bowl score. But there is nothing that is less interesting than there's nothing less interesting than a sport where defense is completely essential to the sport. Where in an All-Star game, you know there's not going to be any defense played, so why would you even bother? I mean, even the players are bored. I mean, the guy announcing the game said, that would have been, on a normal day, that would have been a 2-yard run. It went for like 42 because nobody really tackles in this game. Well, that's great. How you going to watch that? You can't watch the sport where you have to tackle and you have to go get the quarterback, and then in this game you don't do that. Well, then how is it? How are you really playing this game? You're not. You're putting on some kind of glorified scrimmage with uniforms on. You know. I see Magic chiming in. You get into this whole stuff about the greatest and who's this and who's that, and it's very nice that they. I mean, do you put Magic? Do you put Kobe ahead of Jerry West? Where do you put Jerry West? Where do you put Kobe? Where do you put Magic? Where do you put Wilt? Where do you put Kareem? I mean, they've had so many. Elgin Baylor, they've had so many players. He did play his whole career there, but I mean, him versus Magic versus Wilt versus Kareem. I mean, you're talking. I made this point the other day. As someone who I try to be generation, and the Senna's gone now. He's a dinosaur. He doesn't walk the earth in the way the old Sennas walked the earth. But to me, it's based on just sheer dominance. If I were going to pick 5 guys to put on my first team for all time, I would pick Wilt, Russell, this regardless of position. Wilt, Russell, Jabbar, Michael, and LeBron. That would be my 5. I don't know how anybody could argue with any of them. My 6th man would be Oscar Robertson. And then from there you could fill out. And, whether you like Larry Bird in the top 10 or you don't, whether you like Moses Malone in the top 10 or you don't, or you like Jerry West and Oscar in the top 10 or you don't, or you like Bird and Magic in the top 10 or you don't. You almost need, to me, after those first 5 slots, and I said 6 because I put Oscar in the 6th spot. And when I was growing up, Oscar was considered the best all-around player of all time. All-around player. If I take those 6, then I could fill in the next 9 slots to 15, and then I think I cover everybody I need to cover and put in that list. So whether you are number 7 or number 15, like I said, it's going to be up to the beholder. Do you have Tim Duncan in the top 10 or you don't? Do you have Jerry West? And if you never saw Jerry West play, I can't even explain to you how good he was. Do you have him in the top 10 or you don't? So, again, but I would start with that 5 of Michael, LeBron, Kareem. And Kareem was here's what I'd say about Kareem. Kareem was the central figure of every game he played in for 25 years, counting college, where he won 3 national championships, the pros. I mean, to me, you're looking at, and then Wilt. I mean, how do you even discuss Wilt? I mean, and Russell, all he did was win 11 championships in 13 years. So, to me, that would be my 5. Someone might have a different one, but if I say, "Oh, this guy's greater than that guy," after someone perishes, you want to say, "Oh, he's the greatest of all time." That, again, he's an iconic player. Whether you want to list him 7th or list him 15th, he's still an iconic player. It doesn't make any difference. It really doesn't. We know he's a great player, as are all those guys. The Lakers have been graced with so many of them. I mean, when you realize they had Wilt, they had Jerry West, Elgin Baylor, and Wilt Chamberlain on the same team, and didn't win. It wasn't until I made the switch from the injured Baylor to Jim McMillan, the team took off and won 37 games in a row and won the championship in the dance. There's just so many guys with that franchise. You know, we even mentioned Shaq. You know,
New York Sports Radio. Mike's on, Mike's on. He'll get you the sports any way that he can. It's Mike Francesa on the fan. Sports Radio 66 and 101.9 FM. WFAN.
all right, a little past 6. This is Mike's on the fan on this Monday evening. You just heard Bob say that the Lakers-Clippers game tomorrow night has been canceled, which makes sense. I mean, listen, they're still trying to get their arms around in Los Angeles what the heck's going on here. We still don't even have some of the names officially of the people. I mean, there's been no official release of all the names yet. They've leaked out in a couple of places, and people are placing, think they have gotten to 9 now. Some places have gotten officially to 7 now. But the point is, that's how slow this process has been. So you can understand that. That makes, on a lot of levels, that makes plenty of sense. It really does. I mean, the Lakers don't want to look like, there's any basketball celebration going on in this period of mourning right now in Los Angeles. So it happened right there. I mean, so clearly that makes so much sense. And this isn't just one guy who had an accident. This is 9 people, and although we will spend, as everyone will, a lot of the time, the bulk of the time, on one person, there are 8 other people dead here. This is an incredible tragedy. This is a tragedy of enormous proportions. I mean, you're talking about young kids, gone at early teenage years. Multiple kids in this helicopter. The pilot. I mean, you're talking about 9 lives have been lost here. So this is an incredible, just really a horrific tragedy. It's not just losing an iconic basketball player, Kobe Bryant. It's everything that goes with it, and the idea that the death toll is as high as it is. With we're talking about 9 people. That's unbelievable. We don't know a lot about. Some things about his daughter and how gifted she evidently was. I wasn't even aware that his daughter was a great basketball player. I mean, I can't, to be honest with you, I know Kobe wasn't, quiet in retirement. I know he was out there working with players. I know that he was, writing some stuff, and he did some. I've seen some of those features he's done, just like Peyton Manning does those things, those digital profiles and those things that are done like on ESPN Plus. Kobe had some things like that too that he's done, basketball things, with Kobe and stuff. So I've noticed him do a couple of things like that. So it's not like he's been in any way quiet or stepping to the into the shadows since he's retired. But it wasn't also like he was with you day in and day out. At least I didn't notice that. I mean, now I know he still worked with some players, and there were players that he's remained close to, and he remained very close to the game, which made you think he would get back in the game in some big way, which I don't know what his plans were. I know that he's been highly successful financially. Now, obviously, he was a star player who played, over 20 years in the league. He obviously made a lot of money, but he also did very well in terms of his, his business acumen. He got into the soft drink business with, and did very, very well with the company was bought over. He was very involved with the shoes, and was very detailed in that regard. And burst on the scene at the age of 18 and hit the ground running, and away he went over a very, very long and distinguished career. So again, the Laker franchise has been blessed with so many top players. So many different guys who have come through the Lakers. You know, and it's just a very very tragic situation. It really is. It's a horrific situation, and gone at a when his life really is the second part of his life is just really starting, and sounded like he had a lot of plans to do a lot of different things. You know, and was going to have a pretty big impact on things in his own way. So from that standpoint, he was going to clearly make a mark. I don't think there's any question, and he already had, obviously, with his life in basketball, which had lasted a very, very long time. With his, uh, I know LeBron passed him in points the other night. You know, you don't pay that much attention to those kind of numbers with those guys when you look at it. I mean, when you're up there where he is, you have those kind of numbers. When you play in a league that long and you're a guy who scores as many points as he does, and you're that kind of scorer. And I know, those prolific games, which people latch onto. Whether he scores 80 or scores 60 or whatever he might score. Those games, people really like that stuff. They really do. And I know the NBA TV is replaying. I guess his last game. What did he score? 60 in his last game. I think it wasn't it 60. Well, I know that game was a little goofy. The way he took like a million shots, in that last game. But I think they're showing that game tonight. As a matter of fact, I don't know if they're showing that one or showing the one where he scored 81. I don't know which one they're showing, but they're showing one of his big scoring games. That one, I think the 81 game probably better to show than the last one, because that last one, if I remember, someone could correct me, but I think the last one wasn't he like firing up like a gazillion shots in that game, trying to get to that many points. I mean, it was just, like throwing up everything, if I remember right, for that last one. But obviously, when you have that kind of career, that kind of impact over that period of time, and again, you're one of those guys who just has a first name. In the NBA, if you're one of those guys, you know how iconic your career is, and he's had that same kind of run, and he was always someone who people wanted to see. He's one of those players who just, is just like it's special when he comes to the arena, just like when Jordan came to the arena, or uh, LeBron comes to the arena. I mean, whatever it is, those kind of guys, they make that kind of difference. They really do. So the Lakers have canceled their game tomorrow night. I don't know what kind of plans anybody has for any thing to do with the family or funeral arrangements or anything like that. I mean, they have so much to go through right now. When you realize it's not just his wife just didn't lose Kobe, she lost a daughter too, which is just beyond words how bad that is. I mean, that's just something that any mother just you're not supposed to bury your children. It's not the way it's supposed to be, and that's just so horrific for what was obviously a very, very talented, very special young girl. I didn't realize she was such a basketball prodigy, but I guess she was pretty much in her own right, and was going to follow along in the in her father's footsteps as far as making an impact as a basketball player. I saw the Giants hired Kitchens as their tight ends coach, huh? So you heard those stories about putting a swing set together. So I guess it paid off. Whenever he paid him for the swing set, paid off that time. So he comes to the Giants as a coach now. So the pilot in helicopter crash was certified for bad weather. Yeah, that's okay. But the question is, I mean, at what point does it not make any sense? There was stories this morning that the police helicopters had come down because of the fog and low visibility that they had stopped flying. So again, there's reports that the pilot had received guidance from controllers about the low visibility and the fog and everything. You don't know if this is, I mean, that's what these guys do now. Figure out what is pilot error, what isn't pilot error, what happened here, what malfunctioned, or what was, a wind shear or, low visibility or fog or who knows. I mean, I understand they have to recreate that. I understand it affects everything going forward. You want to recreate everything so that you can learn from it and do better in the next time you're trying to throw the ball around. Uh, and it'll impact things as far as because there will be, unfortunately. I know no one wants to think about that right now, but there will be lawsuits here. I mean, that's an absolute given. And these kind of things, there's always lawsuits. There's always wrongful death suits. So that will happen. Always. They might get settled, but they're always out there. I mean, hey, you're talking about a very wealthy man who was giving people a ride, and then they don't arrive. Their families are going to file wrongful death suits. I mean, that's just the way it is. So, I mean, again, that's not what anybody's worried about right now. It's just more of what his wife has to deal with. She has to go make sure she protects her family and protects her family's legacy and protects her family's, financial well-being and her daughters and everything else who have to live without a sister and have to live without a father. And it's just horrific, absolutely horrific in every way. Back after this. It's been, like we said, a couple of crazy days where I can't remember a time where more stories have just knocked the Super Bowl off the bat, which is a good thing. It really is because it'll make it easier to deal with the game where you don't feel like that you've dealt with the game over and over again. Here it is. Tomorrow's already Tuesday, which is media day. So you go through that tomorrow, and I'm sure a lot of the theme will be how these young players, a lot of them grow up, and one of the players, because Kobe is right in that spot where he's in his prime when these guys who are playing right now are growing up. I mean, so a lot of them are influenced by a handful of people. One of the ones they're going to be influenced by is Kobe Bryant. So he is going to be one of the people that actually influence people a lot. There's no question because he's right exactly in that time period. There he is playing until 3 years ago, playing in this league for 20 years, being a tremendous talent, incredibly, incredibly consistently excellent player, where he just played at a very high level for a very long time. Nothing he really couldn't do. Was your prototypical, shooting guard. I mean, that's what he was. And that's exactly, if you wanted to compare someone to Jordan, he'd be the guy you want to compare because they play the same way. They're a little different in their offensive because no one's exactly like Michael. But the point is, he's the same type of offensive player. That's the way it works out. And LeBron's very different in terms of their skill sets than those guys. So, but the game hasn't changed. The Chiefs are still a point and a half favorite. It's pretty much been solidified there. As I said, the ticket has become a hot. It looks like it's going to be a pretty hot ticket for the game. I think a big part of that is Kansas City. They haven't been there in 50 years. They have a rabid fan base. So if they waited a long time and said, "Well, that year I'm going to splurge and go to South Florida," maybe they did. Maybe this was the year they said we're gonna go. So they will be descending two very, very solid teams. Very good matchup in a lot of ways. I mean, there's a lot to like in this game. There's a lot of stars. There's a lot of firepower. There's a lot of storylines. You have all the Andy Reid stuff. You have, and the idea, forget pressure, the idea of that it's his time. You know, I, I'm sure, listen, everybody feels pressure to win the Super Bowl. You're in the game, you desperately want to win. That's all there is to it. We all know that. So, I mean, that goes without saying. But if you're Andy Reid, you're 61 years old. You've, you've won 14, you won 10 or more games 14 times. You've taken Kansas City to 7 straight winning seasons, 6 straight to the postseason, 2 straight to the AFC title game. You've clicked off, a good number of wins every year. You've won 14 playoff games in your life. You've won over 200 games in your life. You're the only guy on that list who has 200 wins that hasn't won some kind of championship. And now's your chance. You got there once. Team didn't play badly, made too many mistakes, turned the ball over, outgained your opponent, your very renowned opponent, outgained them by a good margin. Good on third down, move the ball, just turn the ball over too much. 4 turnovers. You don't want to go to the Super Bowl and turn the ball over. And then here you have Mahomes, who's on the verge. There's a lot of good players in this game, a lot of big players in this game. Look at the tight ends as both just superb players. I mean, incredibly talented and goofballs too. So they have the whole thing going for them. And then you have obviously the speed of Hill, and the cockiness of Sherman on the other side. You have really good players. You have Bosa, and you have guys like that, and then what Jones means to the Kansas City defense. Then you have, here's Mahomes on the verge of becoming the biggest figure in the NFL. He's got it all. He's got the whole package, and this would be almost at this stage of his life, this would be almost a Montana-like emergence for him. I could almost see him doing to these games what Montana has done to this game, where he just goes in there and throws like a 340-yard game where the ball don't touch the floor, and he doesn't turn it over, and he runs for 1 and throws for 3, and now he's on the Wheaties box, or now he's everywhere, and he's the guy. You could almost see that emergence with him. I could see this being his time right now. And I like Garoppolo. I do. I've talked about how I would have made that trade. I didn't think it was overspending. It's going to be fascinating. I think those who discount him, it's not like I'm saying he can't do the job. I think he can, but he won't be asked to do. They will rely on their running game for a couple of reasons. One, because it's so good, but 2, because their running game serves so many purposes for them. It allows them to balance the game. It allows them to balance what is this prolific Kansas City offense and keep it off the field. So there's so many reasons why the game in the hands of their running backs is the key to the game for them. We all know that. We all know they're going to run the ball, but it's not that. If Kansas City can't stop them when they're running the ball, and they couldn't, and the teams that they've seen so far in the playoffs could not stop them. Minnesota didn't stop them, and Green Bay just got run over like they got hit by a truck. Clearly, you have here in this Niner team a very talented two-way team. They have a great pass rush. They have big offensive line. I mean, they have the whole man. They have the whole thing. They really do. And again, one thing that is a bit of a pet peeve of mine is stop with this idea that Shanahan, has got to vindicate his loss in the Super Bowl. He didn't have a loss in the Super Bowl. He wasn't the head coach. He doesn't have a Super Bowl loss. At 28-3 is not on him. This is his first game in the Super Bowl. This is not his second. You don't get score. You don't get keeping score for Super. We don't blame things on coordinators. So that's nonsense. I understand what happened in that game, but it wasn't on him. It was on the head coach. That was up to him. So Shanahan, to me, has got a clear slate. Unless he wants to take a couple of bows for what his father did, because his father obviously has got a couple of these, and this is Team Shanahan. His father's still there. His father's got his fingerprints all over that running game. I mean, it's his running game. That is the Mike Shanahan running game in every way. You know that? Absolutely. That is his. That is his running game, handed down father to son. No one else does it like that. They do it, and it is theirs. It is Team Shanahan, and you can see how much Mike's involved, and that is a very, very tough running game to stop, and that's going to be front and center also. So there's a lot, really a lot to get to, and a lot to like about this game, which should be very evenly matched. Both good, solid, young, aggressive, cocky, fast. I mean, you got the whole thing here. Uh, Two teams playing really well, explosive. I mean, everything. I think this is a terrific Super Bowl. I really can't wait. I'm going to the game, taking my boys to the game. Um, you know, that's one thing. Florida's a pretty quick hop, skip, and a jump. So I'm gonna go down to the game. I don't know I don't know how many more of these I'm going to go to. I always say after the year's over, I always say, that's it. I'm not going anymore. And then I have a reason to go to this one. Well, I was going to go to if Kansas City was in it because my youngest is a big Kansas City fan. And yes, we're taking Julio, so he'll be rooting for the Niner contingent. So Julio's going with us to the game. So we have Julio on the Niner side. And Jack's lining up with Julio, and I'm lining up with Harrison because I'm rooting for Andy Reid. So we have the Kansas City side and the San Francisco side. We got both covered 2-2. So somebody's coming home a winner, and somebody's coming home crying in their soup. And I'm hoping against hope that this is Andy's day because I'll be really bummed out if it's not. That's a sentimental part of this game this week. It really is for me that he get this one because hey. I think I know this. I think Andy knows this too. You don't know if you're getting back to one of these. You might think you are. You might think you're getting back with this team next year. Hey, everything's got to bounce right. You got to keep your players healthy. You saw that this year with Mahomes. The ball's got to bounce right. Everything's got to be perfectly aligned. When you get there, you got to seize the moment. You don't know when you're coming back. You can't worry about that. It might be tomorrow. It might not be at all. Look at Dan Marino. There'll be there's a statue of him outside that building. And everyone's going to walk in and they can think about the fact that he went there as a baby and then never went back, despite being one of the great quarterbacks of all time. Two things that jumped out at me before I go. One was what Jeter said about Kobe, and the other was what Boeheim said about Kobe. Looking at it from a coaching standpoint and looking about how hard he worked and how he had never been around a player ever who worked harder, ever. That says something. And his commitment to being an excellent player. Jack Nicklaus said the same thing too. He says, you don't have to be a basketball fan to appreciate excellence in athletes. Just excellence. Just guys who drive to be excellent. And he was one of those guys. He wanted to be that good. He worked hard to be that good. That's a legacy to leave anytime, is that you work hard and you want to be the best. And that's what Kobe obviously clung to, and what he wanted was the ability, more than anything else, just to be remembered as a guy who was driven to be the best.